and
That's
we
right.
weren't feeling well, so we didn't want to
But
come
everyone's back, ready for action. Mic check. Here we
We
go.
talked about that the other day too. We were wondering what was it different when there's somebody here.
Oh, it's different. There's no question that it's different.
You look at the
Screen more.
their camera.
Yeah, well, I don't
There's
share
nobody-
my attention with that
Not,
either.
not even faking it like there's an audience.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about a very interesting subject and a very real and relevant subject, and that is the fact that justice and kindness are often two very different things. Sometimes the right thing to do is actually not right at all. And as strange as that may sound, we see it all the time, even in our system today, where the legal system follows course, it follows suit with what it needs to do, and yet somehow the judgment seems lacking. It seems lacking. And you ask yourself if morally we're really meting out the punishment that fits the crime. And not always it does. And that's one of the big problems of our justice system, of any justice system. And in reality, the same thing can be found in the Torah. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is how we find that path between what is just and what is right. So to start off, I want to share with you a story that happened with Mayor LaGuardia.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago, in 1935. Mayor LaGuardia, Fiorello LaGuardia, was a Jewish man. He was Jewish. Many people don't know that.
Did not know that. Born and raised in New York and did not know that.
He was Jewish. The reason a lot of people didn't know is because his name is
LaGuardia.
because his father was Italian. He grew up actually in Greenwich Village. His father was Italian and his mother was a Jewish woman. Her last name was Cohen. And she came from Italy. Trieste, Italy. And though he wasn't active and observant in any way as a Jewish man, when it came to Jewish issues, he was extremely vocal. This is actually interesting that I learned, is that he was one of the most vocal opponents to Nazi Germany. There's very few people in the American government who were willing to be vocal about it. And because of his background, which is the way he viewed it, he felt it really hammered. It was an issue that touched him very deeply, and he was extremely vocal about it. But he was definitely Jewish. There are many stories that are told about him. He was quite a flamboyant guy with a large personality. I always say that his greatest punishment was that the airport was named after him. Considering the legacy for all those that have flown into LaGuardia. But
It's pretty scary.
I mean, today, people that don't know who he was or anything about him, the name LaGuardia is synonymous with
With this little
yeah,
airport.
exactly. Anyway, there's a story that's told about a night in January of 1935. It was just in the middle of the Great Depression. And during that time, during the Great Depression, he was mayor of New York City, as everyone knows. And he was once walking through, he loved to walk his city and really experience it from the ground up. So at one point during his travels, he was in a really shady part of town, and he decided to stop in at the local courthouse. It was later on in the evening already, but the courthouse was still open. And he went over to the judge. He said, "Take the night off. I'll take over." He sits down, and the next case on the docket that's brought before him is a woman who is accused of shoplifting. She stole a loaf of bread. The shopkeeper comes forward and says, "She stole this loaf of bread. Look, I have eyewitnesses." They ask the woman, "How do you plead?" And she says, "I did steal the loaf of bread." She says, "My son-in-law ran away this morning. My daughter fell ill, and there's no way to provide for my 2 grandchildren. So what choice did I have but to steal that loaf of bread to provide for them?" So put yourself in the mayor's shoes. What is justice and what is kindness? Obviously, the legal decision required for this situation was that this woman shoplifted, and which required either her to pay a fine or to spend 10 days in jail. Pay the $10, the 10 cents, or spend 10 days in jail. That's what would have ultimately been required of her. But of course, is that the moral route? Can you really fault this woman for not being able to provide for her family? So that's where I want to take you tonight. I want to take you into that gray area. Because, of course, we're not judges, but even in our lives, we are presented with these difficult dilemmas where we try to figure out what to do. How do we find that balance between being just and being kind, being beneficent? Let's just fix the screen here. Our screen is shading down automatically. Okay. My condolences. There we go. So, the first text that I want to share with you comes from the beginning of the Parsha of this week, which is from the fifth of the 5 books. We're now in the book of Devarim, or Deuteronomy. And it says, quite clearly, you shall set up judges, shoftim v'shotrim, judges and law enforcement officials, which interestingly enough, you need to have both. The Torah tells us that, because if you have a judge and you just have a ruling but no way to enforce it, well, you don't have a justice system at all. So a justice system means having both hand in hand. And what does it say? You shall judge the people with righteous justice. That's the first strange term that we see. Righteous justice. But is there justice that's not righteous? Or is there righteousness that's unjust? How exactly does it work?
The punishment should fit the crime. Right? That would be righteous. That's what I would think would be righteous justice, as opposed to extreme punishment for a minor infraction.
Well, okay, maybe, or you could argue that that's not justice at all. I don't know. It's an interesting question. We'll explore it in a minute. What else does it say? Don't pervert justice. Don't show favoritism. Don't take a bribe. Don't blind the eyes of the wise. Don't pervert your words. And then again it says, righteousness, righteousness shall you pursue. Again, another double. Another double. Seemingly superfluous word. Why do we say righteousness, righteousness? Torah doesn't have a stutter. Why is he repeating himself? What's with the redundancy?
Because that's the essence of being a Jew. You have to say things twice.
Well, that's usually because to get the other person to listen to you.
That's why services always take so long, because we say everything twice.
At least, you're right. You're right. It's true. Where'd the whole repetition of the Amida start from?
There you go.
The whole repetition of the Amida, it literally is saying the entire thing a second time. 1 or 2 prayers that are added. It actually came because they weren't saying it twice. Most of the people weren't saying the Amida. They didn't know how to read.
Right.
And they didn't have books. So therefore they said, hey, we're not going to show up. I said, no, we'll find a way to include you. Here we'll have someone who knows the prayers go up in front. He'll say it and you'll simply say, Amen. I attest to that. So we have these redundancies here, and right away we see that there's something unique about justice. It's not as black and white, open and shut, as we thought. There is more to justice than meets the eye. Okay? You might think justice means you take a look at the facts, and based on the facts that you see, you adjudicate. Did this happen? Did that happen? What's the law? What's the ruling? Great, move on. But in fact, the Torah is telling us that there's a lot more that has to be taken into account than just the mere facts on the ground. So, Nachmanides says, why does it say righteousness, righteousness? Because you have to pursue righteousness regardless of whether you will gain from it or you will lose from it. First explanation. Why does it say a double turn? Because sometimes being righteous will bring you reward instantaneously, and sometimes being righteous will bring you punishment, and that's okay. Being righteous and doing the right thing is irrelevant of what you're going to receive from it. Okay, that's his first explanation. Doesn't really talk about why it says righteous justice, but at least he's answered half of the dilemma. But this is not a substantial answer because, in fact, this redundancy of term is found in other places as well. It's not just here. Now, people often will tell me, well, Moses made a mistake. Okay.
After all, he did stuff.
Right, that's true. So maybe,
He wrote it twice.
Exactly. But in fact, even in Genesis and Bereshit, going all the way back to the beginning of the Torah, 4 books ago, it says, "For I love him," this is God speaking to Abraham, it says, "I love him because he will command his household and descendants to keep the way of God, to do righteousness and justice." Again, we see that Hashem commands from us and demands from us that we should be both righteous and just. So, this is not an anomaly that exists only in Deuteronomy, in Devarim. This is a point that the Torah is making to us. There is righteousness and there is justice, and they have to be conducted in tandem. So, we see that there are puzzling situations. Justice might call for this woman to be punished, right, in Mayor LaGuardia's case. But righteousness might call for us to let the woman off because, hey, she can't support her family. She has no food to feed her grandchildren. So how do we live our lives with both justice and righteousness? Because we all want to do the right thing. And I really do believe that genuinely people want to be good. Most people. But the reality is that we don't live in a world that is black and white. It is gray. It's not easy. So you have already the fact that the world is confusing. That's working against you. You have your own animalistic instincts, your own selfish desires. That's working against you from doing the right thing. And to top it all off, you have society. And society is not the most beneficent, selfless group of people. And that's also working against you. So even if you wake up in the morning, Artie, and you really want to do the right thing, there's a lot of headwinds that you have to face. So when I look out at people, I'm not talking about people that do the wrong thing. I do believe that deep down they really want to do the right thing, but it's not that easy. It's not that simple. Does that mean we left them off the hook? Absolutely not. But it's also important to understand the struggle that they're experiencing and where they're coming from. And it gives us a little bit of empathy as we talk to them and as we work through with them. So this is one of the difficulties and dilemmas that we have. Being just and being righteous. Okay? And just to consider an example as we're going through tonight's discussion. You have a sister or a brother. Okay? They do the wrong thing. You have a child. Maybe they have a bad addiction or a dependency on something that's unhealthy. You want to be kind to them. You want to give them, you want to show them love. But on the other hand, you want to be just. You know what you need to do. You know what the right thing is. How do you find that balance? You have a sister or a brother that, is very self-consumed and is in their world, and they're coming to you and they're saying, I need this, I need that. What do? Or do you act justly with them? Do you compromise on the justice? Do you not compromise? How do you find that balance? This is a very real issue that I think people face on a daily basis. So to find some guidance on this perspective, we're going to go back to one of the master judges of all time. And in fact, it's not widely known that he was such an amazing judge. But actually, King David was renowned as a judge of the court. Even though everyone knows about King Solomon's wisdom and it's widely described in great detail, King David was the first one to establish a true court and true rule of law. And that was because he was such a successful warrior that he gained great respect. People heeded his word, and so naturally people came to him to try and fix their situations. The other thing that King David had going for him is that he was a tremendous Torah scholar. We all think of King David as a warrior. He vanquished all of Israel's enemies. He vanquished Goliath, right? He was a warrior, and he was. But he was a scholar at heart. It says that he never slept more than a few hours a night. He was always studying Torah, always, constantly, to the point where when it came time for him to pass, it says that he, through divine intuition, he was able to sense that he was going to pass on Shabbos. So every Shabbos, when he felt his time was coming near, he would learn a whole Shabbos. A whole Shabbos, every single moment, so that the angel of death could not take hold of him because he was in the middle of studying Torah. And so it passed, it says in the Talmud, 1 week after another week after another week, until finally the angel of death got smart. He created a rustle in the trees. David was walking down some steps. He stopped for a second, tripped on one of the steps, and in that moment, his soul was taken. This is who King David was. So King David is a man of many hats. He's known as a warrior. Of course, he's a poet. He wrote Tehillim, the book of Psalms, and he was a musician, famed musician. He used to play a flute that was supposed to be angelic, but he was also a tremendous scholar. So, David reigned over Israel, and he administered, it says, justice and charity for all his people. In the book of Samuel, the prophet Samuel, which is where the stories are written of David and Solomon, it says he administered justice and charity to all of his people. Again, a double reference, similar to the justice and righteousness, that is required of the judge. So what did it mean in David's time? Hopefully we understand a little bit of what it meant during David's time. We'll be able to apply it to ourselves, maybe even Mayor LaGuardia. So the Talmud tells us that David often judged people and decreed one man to be innocent and the other man to be guilty, owing money to the plaintiff. When he saw that the defendant who owed this money now was poor, David would oftentimes, take from his own money and give it to the defendant, because the man didn't have the money to pay for it. And this is what the verse means, that David administered both justice and charity, because justice required him to rule in favor of the wealthier man. Justice is justice. But at the same time, he had a conscience. He felt morally responsible to help out this individual, and so he administered charity as well, even in that same moment, helping this person complete his sentence. And that is the charity aspect. So you can't compromise on justice, and you can't compromise on righteousness. A true leader has to find the balance between the two of them. And that was David's skill, that he was able to find both tzedakah, or tzedek, which means righteousness, being righteous, and mishpat, which means justice. You can do both. And yet, in the book of Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, in chapter 119, David writes something very, very interesting. King David writes, I have done justice and charity. Do not allow me to be robbed. Who's going to rob King David? It was a strong guy with a big army, right? You worried about a pickpocketer? What's he?
I'm thinking it's more like, don't make me regret what I've done, as opposed to physically being robbed.
And here's one of the stories that they say could have taken place. A guy walks up to his friend, and he says, hey, Shimon, want to make a quick buck? He says, sure. All right. Let's go to King David's court, and you'll claim that I owe you $10,000. All right? You'll claim that I owe you $10,000. I will come forward, and I'll admit that I owe $10,000. What's going to happen? Then I'm going to tell King David, hey, I don't have the money to pay for it. So King David's going to take out the $10,000 from his pocket, and he's going to pay, and you'll take 5, and you'll give me 5. And we make a quick buck. I'm sure that they didn't have this issue in other countries, because only a Jewish cup could come up with something like this.
Right.
And this is what it meant, that David understood that the method of justice and charity, it opens you up, it makes you susceptible. So he prayed, I hope I will not be robbed, that people will be honest in this dealing, so I will be able to administer both justice and charity. But it teaches us right away that there are pitfalls. There are pitfalls. It's not always that simple as someone comes before you and say, well, I should really punish you, but it's okay. People can take advantage. You can turn from being the charitable one to being the enabler. You think you're helping out that person, but you aren't really. You're simply enabling their bad behavior. Something we see with people that have behavioral problems or unhealthy habits or even addictions. We think we're doing the best thing for them, but in reality, we're really not. So finding that balance between justice and righteousness is something that needs to be approached case by case, person by person. Every instance and every situation is truly different. And are we taking enough time to consider all of the ramifications before we move on a course of action? That's the first question we need to be asking ourselves. So, back to the case of Mayor LaGuardia. What did Mayor LaGuardia do? He's faced with this predicament. This woman is guilty, but of course, can we really hold her morally responsible for just trying to support her grandchildren? He pulled a King David. Well, like a King David. He said, the fine has to be paid. Fine is a fine, it has to be paid. And then he pulled out $10 from his pocket, and he handed it to the woman, and she paid the fine. And then he turned to everyone that was gathered in the court, and he said, and now I'm going to fine all of you 50 cents a person, because you're all responsible that we live in such a city where a woman can't even afford a loaf of bread. And every single person gave 50 cents, including and the shopkeeper. Gladly. That's what the story is told. Gladly gave 50 cents. Because even the shopkeeper understood that justice is justice and righteousness is righteousness. He wanted to help this woman. But if he wouldn't take the fine, it would set precedent for everyone to run out and rob and steal. Even those that didn't need a loaf of bread to feed their grandchildren. Even those that could afford to do it the right way. So, every case we have to consider the ramifications. Is it enough to simply give and say yes at every turn? Not always. We may be doing more harm than good. Does that mean that we go to the other extreme? We turn cold and rigid when it comes to right and wrong? No. Can't turn off our heart. We can't turn off our eyes to the context of the situation. But number one, slow down. Slow down. Don't rush to judgment. Consider all of the aspects of the case presented in front of you. And ask yourself, what is the just action that needs to be taken? Okay? And why is that the just action? And then we could start to explore, well, now that I understand the just action, ask, well, what's the morally required answer? How do I help this person? Not just by doing the right thing, but doing the right thing for them. What's the right thing for them? Because I know what the right thing is for society. I know what the right thing according to our legal system is, but what's the right thing for that person? And that's how you start to build a perspective and a healthy course of action. So King David teaches us that we're constantly juggling. King David and the mayor, they teach us that we're constantly juggling these two responsibilities, these two aspirations to be both just and to be righteous. And it is not an easy thing to do. And it requires constant revision and research. But let's take tonight's discussion and move it even a step further. Let's talk about mediation and compromise. Because even though we recognize how difficult it is to help out other people and to find that balance in how we help them, whether it be total justice or mixed in with a little bit of kindness and charity. What about when we're in a discussion, when we're in an argument, when we have a disagreement? What happens then? Well, Karen, you know you're right. And you are. You are actually right in this argument and discussion. Should you make sure that you are ruled as being right? Should you make sure that your opinion is the opinion that ultimately becomes the final perspective? Or maybe you should shoot for a compromise. Compromise. A little bit of what I say, a little bit of what you say. Is that really such a bad thing? You say no. But maybe it is such a bad thing. Because in reality, that person is wrong. So why would you want to be a little wrong? Why would you want to be a little wrong? If you compromise with someone that's wrong, Artie, that makes us both a little wrong.
But it also makes us a little right.
But I could be all right.
Is being all right the best thing?
I'm not sure.
Not necessarily.
You're right. It's not necessarily the best thing. But this is an extension of our discussion, is how we find that balance between both just and being righteous. When is it a time where we have to stick to our guns? And when is it okay to say, you know what? I might be right. You might be right. It's really not so important. It's more important that we find commonality than we actually figure out who's the right one. When do we take which perspective? So there's actually an argument. There's an argument in the Talmud about this exact topic. Rabbi Eliezer says, thank you, Ari. He says, it's forbidden to mediate. Instead, let the law pierce the mountain. That's what he says. Thank you. Basically, I don't care if you like it or if you don't like it. If you're as stubborn as a mountain, this is the way it's going to be. It may hurt, but it's rule. A law is a law, and justice is justice. So, if we have an argument about something, we're not going to mediate it. We're going to go to the courts. If the courts say you're wrong, tough. That's what he says. Because justice is justice. Remember, what did it say? You can't pervert justice. You can't close your eyes from it. If I know this to be the case, I can't just allow him to act differently. I have to make sure it's enforced.
Okay. Who's the one that fights the righteous side?
What's that?
Which one?
We're coming.
Of the sages is
Now, here's the interesting thing. Where does he take this from? Because this was Moses' line. Moses used to say, let the law pierce the mountain. When Moses was trying to say that rule is a rule, this was the term he used. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying, hey, look, this is what Moses said. But Rabbi Yehuda comes and argues. But you know what Aaron said? Aaron said, you should pursue peace. You should chase after peace. That doesn't sound very peaceful to me. You're choosing to go and enter into litigation and argue about something when you could be sitting and mediating it? Is that really very peaceful? So therefore, he said the following. It is good to mediate. Surely where there is strict justice, there is no peace. But where there is peace, there is no strict justice. So what then is justice that coexists with peace? How can you have peace and justice together? Compromise. Compromise. So that's why he said compromise is a good thing. And the halachic ruling is actually according to number 2, Rabbi Yehuda. That compromise, mediation is a positive thing. If it can be done in a good manner, in a legitimate manner, go for it. If it can't be done, then you go to the courts. Except in a certain instance. This is very interesting. Maimonides comes along and he says, hey, listen, this doesn't make sense. I mean, sometimes you go to the court, sometimes you mediate, when yes, when not. He didn't like all of that confusion. He liked everything organized. That's why he wrote this tremendous book. He wanted everything organized. He says the following. At the outset, you should know that it is a mitzvah to ask a litigant, do you desire a judgment or a compromise? So if someone shows up in my courthouse, I turn to those people and I say, before I get involved here, do you want to compromise or you want to litigate this? If they say they want to compromise, that is even more praiseworthy. Beautiful. Compromise, wonderful. I don't even know the facts of the case. However, if a judgment is already rendered, if they come before me and they start arguing the case, and no one asks them if they want to compromise, or if I ask them and they say, no, and they start arguing the case, and I hear the facts, and I know that Karen is right and Artie is wrong. And then you guys come to me and say, you know what, it's not worth it, let's just compromise. I can't. I cannot. Because I can't pervert justice. Justice is that Karen is right. I can't say, well, Karen's a little right and Artie's a little right. I can't do that. A rule is a rule. And in that case, let the judgment pierce the mountain. We'll have no choice. So, when I can mediate, let's go for it. But justice is justice, and that has to be respected for what it is. Now, as far as the implementation of that ruling, we could talk about charitable perspective. We can talk about being righteous. Right? I may have ruled like Karen, but I may tell Karen that she should consider opportunities where Artie may be in fact correct, or and so on and so forth. But in this instance, I have to be honest about what the situation is. So, compromising is not about one person being right and saying to the other person, no, it's okay. You go first. That is not compromising. Compromising, when does compromising work? Compromising works when two people decide, before they explore the facts on the ground, before they get involved in the nitty-gritty, they make a firm decision that we are not going to look at the facts of who's right and who's wrong. You have a perspective, I have a perspective. There's validity to both of them. Let's go 50-50. That's a compromise. Okay? If you don't believe that his facts are 50-50, then it's not a compromise. And in that case, you need to be honest and upfront. This is very important. Very important. You need to say, no, justice is justice. And if we have an argument about something, and I really can't see your validity in this argument, we need to go to a third party. We need to pull someone else into the picture and ask them to adjudicate. Doesn't have to be a rabbi or a priest. Doesn't have to have a beard. But he does have to have a long black coat, which I happen to have, so we're good. You need to pull in a third party to make sure that you know what is the justice. Now, after you reach a decision, you both accept it. You both accept it. Maybe I made a mistake. Listen, I can only see what I can see. Here we have a third party that we both trust, right? A neutral third party that we both trust. He says it's so, it's so. Does that mean that you go and enforce it and say, hey, look what he said, blah, blah, blah? No. Because in addition to justice, there's also righteousness. But you're honest about the situation. And that's the way that people like King David and Mayor LaGuardia, that's how they ruled, and that's why they were so successful as leaders. Because they respected the rule of law. They respected what justice was. If your son is making problems, if his behavior is bad, he needs to be told such. He needs to be told, your behavior is unhealthy. Here are the consequences to your behavior. X, Y, and Z. Does that mean that I'm going to throw you out? No, not necessarily. I still love you. I want to help you. But I also want to be honest and upfront with you so that you understand the situation. So I want to consider two things. What's the right thing to do? Yeah, of course I have to think about what the right thing to do is. And what's the right thing for you? And sometimes those things go hand in hand together, right? Sometimes you catch your son doing drugs. The right thing is to call the cops. And you know what? Sometimes it's the right thing for the young man too, to learn the lesson. Sometimes it works hand in hand and it's great. Sometimes it doesn't. And so we get forced into this dilemma where we're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? What's the perspective I take? Do I do what the right thing of the law is? The right thing of society? Or do I do what I think is the right thing for this boy who maybe doesn't fit into those realms? He doesn't fit into those boxes like everybody else does. But these are real decisions, and they have to be handled by a case-by-case basis. You can't just apply one standard litmus test to everyone, say they fit here, they fit there, we're good. Because these dilemmas really are a tremendously gray area. Torah tells us in the Talmud, what does compromise mean? If there are two boats sailing on a river and they meet, and if both try to pass each other simultaneously, they will sink, right? Because the waves that they'll create could sink the other boat. I mean, we're not talking about a Princess cruise line or Carnival or something. We're talking about one of these dinghy sailboats, probably. So what do? One has to make way for the other. Same thing if you have two camels that meet each other while they're climbing up a mountain, like Bet Horon. And if they both go up at the same time, it can cause the mountain to crumble. They can end up both falling down. So what do? How should you act? Who should go first? How do we establish this? We want to seek peace, but we also want to do what's right. So the Torah tells us if one is laden and the other is unladen, the unladen one should give way to the laden one. If one is nearer to destination than the other, then the one that is nearer to the destination should give way to the other one. If both are equally near or far from their destination, then they should make a compromise between them while one goes first, and that one compensates the other one. That's a compromise. Because the compromise was in a position where, could they establish legitimacy? No. They were both equally close to their destination, both equally weighed down by their cargo. So how can they establish who's superior? Who gets right of way? They can't, right, Ari? You can't. So if you can't, then we say, well, then you should compromise. Because justice doesn't apply here. You cannot mete out justice here. So in that situation, that's a perfect opportunity for compromise. And what do? All right, you'll go first, and I'll give you a sack of wheat. That's a compromise. When a husband and wife or two partners, a couple, argue, right? Why do we say you should compromise? Do you know why we say compromise? Think about it. Because there's no one that's right. It's the same situation. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases. In most cases. There's no one that's right. You could sit down and adjudicate from today till tomorrow. She's legitimately upset about certain things, and she's a woman, so she has certain concerns and certain needs, and he's legitimately upset and concerned about other things that come more in line with what his needs are. So you could go in front of a judge from today till tomorrow, but there's no way they're going to establish who's right and who's wrong. And in that situation, it's not about justice, it's about compromise. So compromising is important. It has its place in society, and that's a very valuable place in society. But just as important is justice. And when that person is sitting in front of you, and they need to know that they've done something wrong, and they need to understand the consequences of their action, They need justice, not compromise. But that justice goes hand in hand with righteousness. Hand in hand, so that even in that moment where I'm meting out justice, my heart is tearing. That shopkeeper, he didn't want to take that $10 from that woman, the 10 cents for the loaf of bread. But he knew he needed to set precedent. Same thing with King David. But he has to mete out justice, because if not, society as a whole will fall. It will crumble. There's a story that's told back in the old shtetl, in the old country, right? You ever been to the shtetl? No? It's a beautiful place. I've actually been. It's not the shtetl anymore, but if you go to some of these small towns in Russia or the Ukraine, it looks like a shtetl. I was even in a town where one of the Rebbe's is buried, where they have no running water and they have no electricity. No electricity. When the lady offered us some hot water, she went out and got a kettle and put it on her fire. Literally. It was amazing. It's literally the shtetl. You go back. In 1990, I was there in 1998. I mean, and hop, skip, and a jump, and this is the way people are living. So there's a story told about a man and his father that had a dispute. What was their dispute? They weren't wealthy. They were a family that struggled just to make ends meet. And one day, they find a coat. A coat. A nice warm coat. Now these people, they lived in Russia where it was very cold, and they had no heating in their home. No proper heating. It was constantly cold. And they found this one coat. They asked around. No one claimed the coat. What do they do with it? The son says, I should keep the coat. Why should you keep the coat? Because I go out and work. I work so that I can provide with a little bit of sustenance for my grandfather. Now, yes, it's cold in the house, but it's not as windy, it's not as nail-biting, freezing as it is outside. Me working, I should have the coat. His father felt that, what do you mean? I'm the father. I'm the senior person. He has to respect me. I should have the coat. My son should take the coat over me. I'm an old man. He's a young schnook. He could survive the winter. Me, I don't know if I could last it. So I should have the coat. And they argued about it. Back and forth and back. Until they decided they needed to adjudicate. They had to come before a judge that would hear both sides and finally issue a ruling. So they go in front of the judge and they say, I should take the coat. And he says, no, I should take the coat. And the judge says, all right. He was a Jewish judge, a rabbi. He says, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. Fine. They start to walk out. And as they're walking out, the son starts to think, I'm going to take a coat from my father. Yes, it's true that I'm out working and it's windy and so on and so forth, but he's an old man. He's my father. I don't want to take away what possible warmth he can have. He should really keep the coat. And at the same moment, the father starts thinking, I'm going to take the coat from my son. He's breaking his back just to be able to support our family, and I'm going to take what little protection he has from these Russian winters. What kind of father am I? So they both go running back into the court, and they say, no, he should take the coat. And he says, no, I can't take the coat. You should take the coat. Now they're arguing about who should take the coat, but their perspectives have changed. So the rabbi thinks for a moment. He turns to both of them. He says, you know what? I have a spare coat. So why don't one of you take the coat, and the other one will take my spare coat. Why? Because there was no legitimate answer to it. So he reached a compromise. So one of the son turns to the judge and says, I don't understand something. We were just in here 15 minutes ago. You heard the same argument. And yet you didn't consider offering us your spare coat. What changed your mind? He says, that's right. When you came in here and you argued, the coat is mine, right? You thought logically, rationally. You thought about it from a perspective of justice, right? So what did I think? The spare coat belongs to who? It belongs to me, right? Justice dictates that I should keep my coat because it's mine. Why should I give my coat to you? You have no legitimate claim to it. But when you came in here and you said, he deserves the coat because he needs it. And you are, no, he needs it more. He deserves the coat. I naturally start to think, yeah, he deserves the coat. And he deserves the coat more than me because I already have one. And that's why I came up with the perspective. So, we see quite clearly that when we approach dispute and discussion and argument and so on and so forth, even when it's not volatile, even in the small things, consider the situation before you. Is this an opportunity for compromise? If there are really no right answers or wrong answers here, then maybe it's just an opportunity for compromise. But if there is a legitimate argument, and compromising will actually send the wrong message, right? We'll end up enabling that person. We'll be perverting justice. We could be setting a terrible example. Then it's not a point of compromise. Then we need to establish what is the just thing to do. What is truly the facts? We need to establish that. But with that hand in hand, we also never lose our morality. We don't lose our heart. And that's there inside of us, guiding us as we go through each one of these situations. And sometimes that will mean that we find that person, but we help them out anyways. And finish off. Is a story that's told, beautiful story. And I think I've actually told the story before. A story told about this old Hasidic rabbi who also lived in the shtetl. And he had a young boy who was 9 or 10 years old. And in his house, a popular game that they would play, they didn't have any Xbox in the shtetl, no PlayStation. Terrible. So they used to play a lot of chess. Chess. Which is a little bit of a forgotten game, although people do play it, but he used to play chess. Except not on Shabbos. Shabbos in his home, their tradition is a custom. The custom was they didn't play chess, even though there's nothing wrong with playing it. That was their thing. Shabbos is a day of rest, relaxation, and it was a more serious day in their house. They didn't engage in that activity, whatever it was. One weekend, one Shabbat, they have a guest that comes over to visit. The guest comes over and he's staying with them and so on. And this guest was unaware of their custom that they didn't play chess in this household. So naturally he was sitting Shabbat afternoon with this young boy and he asked him, would you like to play a game of chess? The boy didn't know what to do. Of course he knew that in our house we don't play chess. But at the same time he also knew you're supposed to be hospitable to your guest. What should he do? In the end, he decided to play the game. Played the game of chess, and he played really well, and he won, and so on and so forth. Fine, he finishes up, and so on. He goes on with the rest of his business. About an hour later, his father, who's a prominent rabbi, calls him into the study. He turns to him and he says, Yankel, did I see you playing chess before on Shabbos? And the boy turns to his father, and he feels terrible, and quietly, timidly, he says, yes, our guest was here and he asked me to play and I played with him. His father turns to him and says, but you know that we don't play chess on Shabbos. The boy was upset. He was truly broken. Didn't want to disappoint his father. He felt terrible. And then his father let a moment go by and then he picks up his head and he looks at his son and he says to him, but did you win? And that is a perfect example of justice and righteousness. The father felt that it's important that his son understood that we have certain traditions, certain customs, and those have to be respected, even when it's uncomfortable to do so. But at the same time, he empathized with his son. So after establishing the justice of this case, he reached out to him. He empathized with him. He lifted him up, not to feel downright demoralized. And that's the combination that we need to find. We need to be honest. We need to be honorable. We need to be just. But we also need to empathize. We need to be sensitive to the needs and the situation of those that we come in contact with. And that is the secret of a great leader. And it doesn't mean a rabbi. It doesn't mean a business CEO. It means every person in their surroundings, in their environment, you are a leader, whether you like it or not. And if you want to be an effective leader, then you need to learn that balance between justice and righteousness. Sometimes you'll be able to compromise, and hats off to you. But where you can't compromise, be just and be righteous. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Next week, we'll be discussing firstborn rights. We'll be discussing firstborn rights, the effects of children on marriage. Be a very interesting discussion. Maybe we should consider asking people to send in comments before next week's discussion instead of afterwards. As always, feel free to email any and all questions to askmendy@gmail.com. We also want to remind you that in just 1 month's time, we will be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and of course, Chabad of South Tampa will be hosting a complete program for the Jewish New Year. You can get more information on our website at www.chabadsouthampa.com. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.